I won't worry about it.
But I'll tell you at the end. There's a little number.
Okay.
Tell you what I see. All right, and we are live, guys. So welcome to April's Chat and Learn. I am your host, Dr. Danielle Barrett, Education and Training Specialist at the Institute of Child Nutrition. I'm joined by my co-host, Patrick Butler, who is also an Education and Training Specialist here. Before we introduce today's very special guest and our topic, let's go over a few of our housekeeping notes. So welcome to all of our new friends that are joining us for the first time and our returning friends. We are so excited that you decided to spend some time chatting with us today. So if you're new to these monthly chat and learns, they're meant to be informal, fun conversations that connect ICN to those out in the field doing the work. And so this innovative approach connects ICN and child nutrition professionals by empowering, educating, and elevating the leadership discussion. So through these peer-to-peer conversations, we promote active learning, networking opportunities, and information sharing. So we strongly believe that leadership is the ability to influence others towards a common goal. And a leader can be anyone who aspires to lead their team in meeting their goal of feeding our nation's children. So we are streamed via our website at theicn.org/leadership, along with our other various social media platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn. But as a note, I would like to remind you, if you would like to submit any live questions to chat with us today, please use the chat box found on that website live stream. So today we are starting our wellness focus series, and today's topic is work-life balance. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick and let him introduce our guest.
Thank you, Danielle. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Alicia Hall Campbell, Executive Director at the Institute of Child Nutrition. Welcome, Alicia. I'm excited that you're here to chat with us today. I'd love to start with you telling everyone a little bit about you, your background, and your experiences in child nutrition.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick and Danielle. It's an honor to be here. I'm very excited. So thank you for the invitation. I am the Executive Director of the Institute of Child Nutrition. And so my role in this capacity is to oversee and manage grants, cooperative agreements, the development and resource of education and training materials, as well as our applied research division, to develop and network with child nutrition stakeholders and allied organizations, and just to make sure that the staff has the resources and tools to do their jobs effectively. I have a public health background. My doctorate is in higher educational leadership, adult ed. So when I got this position, it was a great combination of public health and adult learning and education and workforce development. So 20 plus years, grants management, workforce development, education, evaluation, program management. So a very diverse, eclectic background, but really excited. And I love the work that we do at ICN. And I'm very fortunate to have an amazing team that really works collectively to ensure that our nation's children are fed healthy, safe, nutritious meals. And with that, that operators have current, up-to-date resources to do their jobs effectively.
Thank you. So we're so excited to have Dr. Hall Campbell with us today. When we started talking about, oh, we're going to jump into work-life balance, we're like, oh, we're going to pull in our boss because she really does talk the talk, not just, or live the talk. What am I trying to say? Walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And so we do want to give a small disclaimer before we start this wellness series. We'll be doing this each time. We are not mental health experts or professionals. We are just talking through what we know works for us and ways that we have found to help. But if you ever decide that you need help above and beyond, please go see the professionals. We highly encourage and promote that. And so we also are going to give the disclaimer that the views and opinions expressed in this session are solely those of our presenters and our guests, not necessarily the official policy or position of the Institute of Child Nutrition. All right, so let's just dive right in. So we're going to start. I would like to hear each of you, and then if I want to add something, I will too. But we're going to start with definitions. So how do you define work-life balance?
All right, so I'll take this first. So I kind of thought of what my definition of work-life balance, and let me again preface, this is Alicia's sort of outlook on it. This isn't an official work-life balance, but I think it's being accountable for your work and responsibilities get within the time frame that's established by your supervisor, team, or whatever that may be, while also prioritizing things that are important to you. I just completed a leadership workshop certification program, and we had access to like some movers and shakers, some really astonishing leaders. And so we were just having these conversations. How do you manage these things? And my question to every individual is, how do you balance things? And one CEO had this statement, and it was so eye-opening for me. And she was like, well, the first thing is there's no such thing as work-life balance, because balance means equal. And there will be many times that things are not equal. So if you can change that mindset and understand that it won't be equal, there may be times that work is the priority and you're focusing here, but then you also got to reflect and realize what your priorities are and then shift back to the life side of it. So if you can go in with that mindset and determine, hey, I have to be accountable. I'm getting paid. This is my job. These are my responsibilities and roles. My deadline is this day. I'm going to work hard, push through. But on the weekends, I'm going to disconnect. I'm not going to check work email. I'm going to prioritize myself, my family, whatever that may be for you, and then just determining how that works for you.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a great way to look at it. For me, it's the balance between my work life and my personal life. And like you said, Alicia, they're not always equal, but it's making sure that you do what you need to do to feel like you're able to balance them both and that you don't feel overwhelmed, because sometimes we can be overwhelmed in either one, but you don't want it to get to where it's so overwhelming where it's like, I can't handle this.
Right. And also, and we may get into this in more questions or things like that, but also being in tune to your physical body and understanding that, I'm stressed or I'm at a point, I'm having anxiety or whatever that may be for you, that you've got to determine what those strategies or what those coping mechanisms are so you can decompress. If you're thinking about work at 10 o'clock at night, like, how are you going to turn that off so you can be present in the moment, so you can reset? Because that's important, having that reset, because you will burn out if you're on go. I mean, your cell phone burns out if you don't charge it up. And that's really important, especially coming off the pandemic, right? And in this field, child nutrition professionals never had that opportunity to work from home as, the administrators did, or as the teachers did. So working nonstop. So finding those strategies that help refuel you, help re-energize you, reset you, that's very important. And finding those sort of boundaries, turning off the cell phone, turning off the electronics at night so your mind can decompress. So you can be a fresh you when you go back in the morning.
Yeah, and so I love the analogy with the battery, because I know for me, that helps me kind of, a lot of times it's perspective and checking yourself, right? And so you both have the general same definition, but you both also said that's going to be unique to you as a person. It's going to be unique to what's going on at home, what's going on at work, and making sure you're just being self-aware. And I think the self-awareness part is so key that it's not talked about as much. But that's kind of how all of our questions, there's a general theme with we also have a lot of questions. So no, we're going to try to answer as many as possible. I'm going to do some general theme questions. So if you submitted one, you don't hear us, we're going to try to do our best. But you both hit on this without just saying it. So I want to actually ask the next two questions as a two-part. So we need to talk about kind of why it's important, right? So we find what it is. Let's talk about why it's important, but also tell me what do you do to help truly practice work-life balance in your own life?
Okay, well, I'll try. So first, I'm a mom of three. So that's really important that, I have my professional career. I'm, moving forward, I'm being responsible and accountable for the work, but it's also important that I'm a mom, and I have very active kids. So one of the things that I try to do is and this was another tip that someone shared with me a few years ago, is being present. And I was also on a call last week, speaking with a leader and asking that same question. And she said, sometimes it's not about quantity, it's about quality. So you may miss a couple of things here and there, but when you're there, you're present in the moment, they have your undivided attention. So moving the cell phone away, taking that time to okay, I'm at home, I'm doing this, we're doing this as a family, that kind of thing. Really respecting personal time off. We have a staff calendar. I'm very respectful of that. I may send an email, but my expectation is that they're not going to respond because they're on personal leave. The weekends, really enjoying that time. I know, there are some times where we have conferences and meetings and events on the weekends, but that's not an every weekend thing. And so really trying to capitalize on those opportunities to be connected and refuel myself, what are those things that help me in that way? So when I am at work, I'm full on and my staff have me in the manner that they need me. So I have to refuel myself as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's, as we've said, like work-life balance is important on how you see it's important. So what do you value? What do you feel like you need to make work-life balance work for you? Like how do you practice the work-life balance? For me, I think, Daniel, you asked this, like, how do we practice it? So for me, I try to set up Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. That's when I work. That's the times that I work. And a lot of the times I work from home. So if that's the case, then what I do is I do not work outside of my home office. When I'm at my home office, that is my office, that is my space, and the rest of the house is my home, because a lot of the times they do get mixed. And, it's very important for me to have a clear definition of this is work and this is home, because it can get overwhelming sometimes. And it can get like, okay, I'm always at home and I'm always at work, because that's where you're at. So I think just taking the time to say, what do I need? Maybe I know a lot of times I'll go for a walk, or I'll take a minute and just read a book, or do something that makes me feel like I'm in control and not everything is falling apart all at once.
Yeah, Patrick, you said something, and I think there's some ways and strategies that you can do this even in the work environment. Many people have a 15-minute break to a couple of breaks during the day, as well as a lunch period, So really taking advantage of that. We have a team at the Institute, they have a walking club. And so they go walking, getting fresh air, getting some sunshine, also exercising, so whatever that is, if you want to read a book or whatever, but really taking that time away during the work hours when you have that time committed to you, that's your time to kind of step away, finding something that's going to refuel you. So when you go back in the afternoon, some people come back after lunch and eat that pick me up. Well, what's that? And, we don't want to indulge in like all of the unhealthy things, but that could be like, I need a meditation moment, or I need to go do a quick little power walk, or I need to just get some fresh air. So really trying to capitalize on those, opportunities within the workday and the work environment.
Yeah, you both said pretty much everything I was planning to also say. So I am also fortunate to work from home, and I have been very intentional. Like Patrick said, my office is my office. I do not mix the work and life space as much as I can, because the worst thing you want to do is kind of lose that balance, because that's when it gets hard, right? It's when things get a little blurry and those lines start to be like, well, where do I get my designated space for myself and for my work time? And so that by far was one of the best pieces of advice I received. And so I would encourage you, even if you were in a physical work environment or office, when you get your time as your lunch or your breaks, step away if you can. And I'm not saying go out and eat every time you get a break. You may still bring your lunch, but go sit outside. Like, sometimes just that 5 minutes in the sunshine can completely turn your day around. And so again, be self-aware and just check in with yourself and be like, yeah, I could probably have a work lunch and sit and eat while I'm working, but we all need to remember to be good to ourselves. And if we need that time to take it, because that's what it's there for, right?
Yeah.
And
One other thing, Danielle, I just want to add to that. So I'm one who has a very long commute. I commute in an hour. And so I capitalize on that time as well. That's a good transition time for me. That's time where I can wind up and get ready for work. I play a lot of music. I'm getting in the mindset, but also on my return, it's my time to wind down. I've gone through the day, you know, what happened, what we had to do here, processed all of that. So when I'm home, that's a good way to decompress. And I've sort of filtered through those items. So capitalizing on your commute, if you have a really hectic commute, long commute, finding those things that sort of inspire you, motivate you to be positive and excited about the day ahead, if it's music, a podcast, or whatever that may be. I also utilize that time to try to get my calls out the way. So again, that's one less thing I have to do when I'm home. I've gone through the list of people I need to check in with, and that's just some time that affords me to do that.
yeah, and so I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of our questions about how to just mentally prepare yourself, because we do have so many people that are transitioning from our work from home to going back into the office. But I think the most important part is it's two-part, right? You're mentally preparing yourself for the workday, but then you're also trying to decompress yourself to be able to be home. And so again, we talk about intention. So I think the last few series we kept saying, tell the people the why. They need to know the why. So I think truly with our wellness one, our new catchphrase is going to be intentional, be self-aware. And so I flipped through some of the questions, and they're so good, but they're also so all over the place. So I'm trying to decide kind of which direction we want to take this conversation. But you talked about doing calls in the car. So one of my favorite questions, because I want this advice, so it's email, and so you're all of our electronic communication. And I know here we use Slack, we use Zoom, we use our emails. And so we have all of these avenues, and sometimes things can get lost. As organized as I am, I know things get lost. So what advice and like the best practices do you have for managing all of your electronic communication?
One, I would say trying to minimize it as much as possible. Communicating what your preferred method of communication is. Some people like text, some people like email, some people like calls. And trying to be, trying to communicate in that manner that helps that individual. So I kind of contradicted myself in that sense, minimizing it, but also, providing that communication feedback in the form that's helpful to that individual. For me, I sort of organize, the email setup. I organize it, try to flag it based on what I have not been able to respond to, what needs my attention. Trying to organize it from that way. But I also believe if you put too much information in the email, I get overwhelmed. And so I've asked my team, like, if it's more than a few sentences that needs a very thorough conversation, let's have a meeting and talk it through. Because a lot of people perceive things in emails, and the unintended consequences that someone's upset or frustrated about what may have been conveyed. You can minimize that in a lot of ways by having some face-to-face or visual communication with that individual and say, oh gosh, that wasn't the tone. So as much as possible, just trying to communicate when it's something that needs a very thorough conversation. But as far as me organizing and managing it, I do use my calendar a lot, plug in meetings and things like that, but also finding that time to say, oh gosh, I have 5 back-to-back meetings in the morning. I need some time to get some work done and that. So just trying to space out my afternoon. So using your calendar as much as possible. And then just trying to flag and organize and create the task. I'm kind of old school in a sense. I still have a to-do list, and I map that out and prioritize my day based on that. And I scratch through what I've done and rewrite it. And the items that didn't get accomplished, they move over to the next day. So just trying to that works for me in a sense, but I know there are a lot more electronic ways of doing that.
Yeah, so for as far as email, I try to make sure that I look at the high priority ones first. And then after I answer an email, I have file folders. So I'll file it to where it needs to go so I can go back for it for reference if I need to. And then I also, once I'm done with something, like if it's a random email, I delete it. If it's just something like, oh, I don't need that, or I'm not going to have to go back to that. But I'm also like Alicia, I like to keep a planner. I have a planner that has everything I need to do for that week written down by day. That way I can see what I need to do. And a lot of times some things may pop up that I was not expecting to do. So I either add those or, whatever I need to do. But yeah, a planner for me works very well because then I can see it and know what I need to do.
Right.
Yeah, so you figure out what works for you. So I am so extra. I do both. Like I have the electronic calendars. I love a good Trello board, so I'll have my electronic to-do list, but I still keep a notebook and pretty much write everything out in it still. But that's how I feel organized. And so while it may take a few extra minutes, it makes me feel like, okay, you feel good about what you're doing, the next steps, you have a plan. And that's the best advice I have heard. They're like, there's so many ways and so many things you can do, but at the end of the day, if it's against your internal nature for feeling that it helps you, that's just hurting the situation worse, right? So don't force it. So this is how we're going to go with the next round of questions, because you mentioned being intentional with your communication. And I think that is very important, knowing how people need to be communicated with and honoring that. Because, some people like those conversations. Some people are like, no, I'm not going to turn on my Zoom screen, and meeting people where they are. And so we have several questions, and I think ultimately it comes down to communication. And so in team building. So it's a mixture of those. So we have some really fun team building type activities that you have led, Alicia. So I would love to hear you share the importance of just knowing your people, being in check with them, because I think you do a great job. And that's a very important part of that work-life balance, is feeling appreciated. So just please share with us all of the great things that you do.
By the way, I didn't pay her to say that. So no, what I feel team building and staff exercises should really be designed about what the issues are in your organization. So if you're having an issue with communication, hey, let's do a communication exercise. Let's work on active listening, repeating back, because, communication is only as good as the receiving end of it, right? So you could have said X, Y, Z, but I only heard Z, then we're still missing the mark here. So trying to create interactive, engaging team building exercises that are relevant to the organization, that's going to help build staff capacity and skills so we can address some of the issues that we're having. So, but you want it to be fun. And also one other thing I would recommend is getting the staff involved in planning some of the activities, because, when staff are involved in part of the planning process, they have that buy-in and they're a lot more excited about it and feeling that pride. So, hey, you plan this one, and you guys did an amazing job for our staff meeting back over in the fall, and, a scavenger hunt and those kinds of things. But having that time to have that camaraderie where the staff know, hey, I've got your back. And so when we're doing a project or something like that, I can rely on you, knowing that we all have the same goal in mind, is that the organization is successful in what it does. And that means sometimes rolling up your sleeves and helping a person out, because you're only as good as your weakest link, right? And so if we have a point where we've got to have an all hands on deck, think about what the organization's goals are. Hey, let's all chime in, help. It may require a little more than what we need, but at the end of the day, we got to do this to get it done.
Favorite icebreaker team building we've done, Patrick? He loves questions.
So I love when you ask me random questions that you don't tell me ahead of time. So I like the scavenger hunt. That was really fun that we did in the fall. And we also had one that we did what is it? An escape room, but it wasn't really an escape room. It was on paper. But I think one that we've done recently that I really like, one of our directors leads us through what are 2 words that you think of right now. And I feel like that is very meaningful. So like, when I ask you, like, what are these 2 words, what comes to mind? Like right now, I'm just grateful and very excited that we're even able to do this. So it's just how are you feeling right now in this moment? And that's such a simple icebreaker and something so simple to gauge, but it's a big deal.
Yeah, so we're being intentional. So that works well. The next question, it's just talking about how do you host employee appreciation events? So making sure everyone feels appreciated.
Yeah.
And so let me give the caveat. It's saying, we can't do this with our federal funds. So how are we being resourceful in doing that?
Yeah. Prior to the pandemic, we used to have like monthly potlucks and we would celebrate everybody's birthday. And, we didn't spend federal funds of that, of course not. But everybody pitched in and brought, their favorite dish, and you had this array of food. That's a little more challenging for us to do now in our current environment. But as a director, I sometimes make donations so we can do XYZ. Even today, we got an email, a staffer brought some donuts into the office and just celebrated. So just kind of random, inexpensive items to just kind of celebrate, acknowledge the staff, because that's important. People want to feel valued and people want to be celebrated. And so just kind of pausing, and that can be, and again, I'll go back and say, have that conversation with your team. Hey, what are ways that we can celebrate you? What are ways that we can honor you? Or what kind of activities would you like to see? And getting that conversation from your team to kind of incorporate some ideas and inexpensive. Hey, it may be, hey, let's have a walking club. We're all going to go walk at this time and do XYZ. So I think there are some costly ways, inexpensive ways that you can do some exciting things with your team.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask 2 questions and kind of lump them together because we always got to watch out on time. And so they're both, I think, communication related. But the first question just basically asks, how is the best way to actually make something clear that you are trying to communicate? But then I want to follow up with one of the other questions was what's the best way to deal when you are feeling unappreciated at work? And so, like I said, communication, but let's talk through that just a little bit.
Well, I think the underappreciation or underappreciated ultimately, like you said, results in communication. And so having that conversation with your supervisor or your director and saying, hey, it's really important that I grow in this area professionally, or my goal is to do XYZ. How can you support me in that endeavor? I want to be the next manager, or I want to be the next director. I think it's important, and the Institute has trainings that I can take free of charge to really get me in that direction. But I think it's important about, one, knowing what it is that you want, but you've got to be able to explain that to the individual, because we can't always assume that everyone knows what we want and need. And so you're not doing yourself a good service if you're not communicating that need. I can't go and make assumptions about what Patrick wants and need and what Danielle wants and needs if they haven't expressed that to me. So it's a two-way conversation piece, right? You need to be able to discuss and articulate what those goals and visions are, and what does appreciation look like for you. Some people like that big, rahaha, kudos, and some people just want just a thank you. So kind of having that conversation, I try to make a very intentional effort when we have our staff meetings, the huddles, to always say thank you. Every time I do a presentation in front of people, I always put a plug in to acknowledge and thank my team for their work and efforts and things like that. So kind of building those things in. Again, everyone is different. They may not value and appreciate my style, but also you've got to communicate what you would like to see and done. going back to the communication and how to ensure it's received, I would say, one, articulating what the message is, but also getting the person to repeat back, and not like a very elementary way, but just saying, okay, so this is the action item from this conversation with this due date. Are we on the same page? Do you offer? Do you have any questions? Do you understand what we're trying to do? So presenting it, kind of having some action items, and then asking, are there any questions, and maybe clarify, what's your understanding of this? So just trying to make sure that you're on the same page, because again, it goes back. I call myself presenting XYZ, that's the expectation, and you only heard Z, then we're going to have a disconnect when it's due.
All right, well, we're almost at our 30-minute mark. And so we finished these by asking a simple leadership question. So I'm going to stump you now because I didn't send this one to you. If you could look back at your very start of your career and give yourself a piece of leadership advice. So it can be related to the work-life balance. It can just be in general, or you can answer both. But what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself not to be afraid to speak up and express in a respectful manner. That came with some years of experience. It was like, oh, I'm supposed to do this and I'm not supposed to say anything. And so that came with some maturity and experience, but it's okay. And I think it's important to say, you can have a conversation about anything as long as it's done in respect, right? And it doesn't always mean someone's going to agree with it. It doesn't always mean you're going to get what you want, but having that conversation gives you that peace of mind that you've expressed it and you put it out there, and then what happens, and then you have to decide if you're good with that. But not being afraid to speak up earlier on is a piece of advice I would give myself.
Yeah, I love that. And the respectful part, I think, is key. As long as you are willing to be uncomfortable and be respectful about it, though, I think that's one thing I've probably learned most from you. So I appreciate that lesson. Anything else you want to throw out there, Patrick, before we wrap up?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. So we want to thank you so much for joining us and talking with us today. We are going to send out an evaluation. So if you have registered in the past month, you have already got to see this, but you will get to see it again. We say, please complete it. Let us know. I think it's 9 or 10 questions. It's super short. But what we want to do is we want to figure out what's working well with our chat and learns, and then how we can improve. So please be open and honest as always, because we want to meet your needs and serve you at the best that we can. And this is going to help us do that. And so just to end, we want to thank you so much for all that you do to feed our nation's children, and we will see you